Trotz Watch updates are always welcome here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. You joined us last week after you had the report, Jeff, that the Jets had the advisory committee where they'd met with Barry Trotz. What are you hearing right now? It seems pretty quiet. I know Elliot Friedman has said, this is not surprising. I mean, there was a number of teams that wanted to talk to Barry Trotz. He'd be a fool not to hear them out. Where are we at right now, and what is this doing to the Winnipeg Jets, who obviously have to have some sort of a plan B if they don't get the guy that they've targeted as their number one choice?
Yeah, well, first off, that's a hilarious Trotz Watch situation.
Remo's dominating these days.
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt. He's playing chess. The rest of us are playing checkers. Anyway, you know what? It is quiet. Quiet is not a bad thing. We all know Barry Trotz remains at the Jets' top of their, wanting list. That's obvious. We know that Barry Trotz has started to interview with other teams. I had heard that, I'd heard prior to the buzz about Philadelphia that he wasn't all that hot on going to Philadelphia, and I'm actually hearing more on that he's not that Philadelphia. I'm not necessarily saying are completely out of it, but I'm hearing he's not leaning that direction. Now, you say something like that, and then the follow-up question is, well, where is he leaning? I think for him, it really is an opportunity to, really look at his options, right? I think the fact that he hasn't come back to Winnipeg and given a yes or no, again, is a good thing. I think he's still mulling that over. I really do think, as I reported before, and other people have reported, as well, is that, there obviously is a management interest in there, whether you want to call it job security, whether you want to call it an opportunity to climb the corporate ladder and peek into the future, whether you want, the way I called it was a long-term solution, right? I mean, if you're looking to have Barry Trotz, evolve into, a position within your management, you're viewing him more than what I think a lot of teams not only are viewing him being the short term, whether that's, 1, 2, 3, 4 years of coaching, or what they can offer him, right? I mean, I think that's the big thing for Winnipeg is that they are one of the few teams who can offer him that kind of, want, which we know is high on his priority list. Now, what are other teams interested in doing? What could, Kelly McCrimmon, who has a close relationship with Barry Trotz, offer him in Vegas? Probably a fair amount, but he's probably not going to offer him his own job. What are Kelly's hopes down the line within the organization? Again, getting in a little bit too much into that, but maybe Vegas is an organization that can offer him something more than just a head coaching job, despite all the, what we know about that organization and how quickly kind of it gets rid of reputable coaches. So there is that. I have been hearing more and more buzz about something potentially happening in Seattle. And I think that might be the one thing that's holding this all up, that Seattle, I'm told, is supposed to, is mulling over some big decisions potentially this week. Now, could something happen there that would create an opportunity for someone like Barry Trotz to take over? Maybe not immediately go into a managing role, but maybe an opportunity to be like an assistant GM and a head coach. Who knows? How appealing would that be to him? Is that something he's waiting for? Is he waiting for other teams to kind of do their best, right? I think that's where we're at. Now, again, I mentioned, no news is kind of good news for the Jets, but the reality for Winnipeg is the clock is ticking. They need to do a lot of things in a small amount of time. And I think that's where things get interesting here, is that True North has Barry Trotz at the top of their list, but they're being advised that they need to move on, explore other options, because I think the fear in that camp is that if you hold on to, waiting for what Barry Trotz may or may not do, and you don't get, he isn't the guy, isn't the team that he chooses, that you might get left with some of your lesser options on your list. And so I think that really is the dilemma with Winnipeg right now is how much longer can we hold off? Can we wait for an answer from Barry Trotz before we start seriously going down, other avenues? And if we seriously go down other avenues, how much longer do we want to wait on guys like a Kirk Muller, who I've been kind of reporting has been, a big potential piece of the interviewing process. I'm hearing buzz that he's getting close to getting an interview. I don't have an exact date or anything on that, but I think if you're looking at a guy, I think a lot of people are looking at guys like Kirk Muller. I know Derek Lalonde hasn't been brought up a lot. I mean, he's obviously still in the playoffs right now with Tampa Bay, but if you want to be in the mix with those guys and you wanted them to strongly be considered, you kind of need to make a decision. So I think that's where they stand. Now, I think, again, the fear is that, and it's nothing against them, but the fear is that if you wait too long and you don't get Barry Trotz and the other candidates you have on your list move on and sign with other teams, you're now forced to take on, again, like a Pascal Vincent or a, Scott Arniel or a Mark Morrison, someone in-house, someone that the Jets have that relationship with. And I think they might be fine with that. I think that they might be fine with that. If we don't get Barry Trotz, we're happy with these other guys who, I'm, again, not trying to say they're lesser options in that they're not quality coaches, but they're lesser options in experience and, in a couple different capacities, from a playing perspective, from a coaching perspective in a lot of ways. Right. So I think what Winnipeg finds themselves in is just kind of waiting for Barry Trotz, while at the same time kind of getting tugged at a couple different directions to say, look, I know Barry Trotz is the guy you want. He might not be the guy you get, and therefore you need to strongly be considering who else might be a plan B right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear who the number one guy on the list is. It's less clear who number two is, but the bottom line is you need to continue doing your due diligence in the case that number one doesn't happen. But at the same time, I'm sure that we want to talk about patience. This organization has always had some patience. And if you have to be a little extra patient to make sure that you give yourself the best chance of getting your number one choice, I imagine that they will do that. The one thing that can be said is that Barry Trotz is almost holding up the entire coaching searches around the league right now, Jeff, and that it's not like teams have just decided that they're out and have gone and made their decision. We've pretty much been at a standstill right now as Barry's picked up his phone or met or talked to the other teams that are interested in, as well as the maybe less notable candidates for all the jobs in the league right now.
Well, absolutely. I mean, but I also think it's not all that, I don't think it's yes. Could you say Barry Trotz is holding up the market? Absolutely. I mean, he is clearly a number one option on a lot of teams' lists. So he is, people are waiting for him. I think there's going to be other teams that do that interview process, and they just hope that somewhere in that line of interviewing people, Barry Trotz is eventually going to make his decision so that they're not done, so they can almost do some gamesmanship here, right? When they interview people, they can kind of make those people feel like they're their number one option, and then if Barry Trotz decides to go with that team, and they can go, okay, well, we have our guy, thanks to all the other applicants, we got our guy, yada, yada, or they can move on. But you also got to remember too, like, candidates like Kirk Muller is going to have other options outside of Winnipeg, and they just got eliminated from the playoffs. So, so how it works in these situations is teams have employees or they have people of their advisory groups that kind of, they throw in, whether it's a text message, whether it's a whatever, who's got a close relationship with this guy, who's got a close relationship with this guy, so they can garner interest. So it's sometimes as simple as, you like the Jets? And you might get a text, yes. And then you don't hear from him, you know what I mean, for weeks until they're eliminated. And then you can start creating your interview list. So all of those moving pieces are happening. You know what I mean? They're happening not just in Winnipeg with all the other teams. So as much as Barry Trotz might be, holding things up, there is a lot of movement in other areas so that teams aren't caught kind of with their pants down, that they can transition on the fly. They can start doing their interview process. They can see who's interested, because, even some of the names that people bring up, sometimes it's just the list that the Jets have or that team has. Nobody knows if necessarily that interest has been reciprocated. And that's how names, there might be a name that no one would have imagined them being interested in them. All of a sudden they're contacting them. So there's a lot of fluid moving pieces that come with a coach's, a hiring search. And so, at this point, it's just, as much as it's kind of like, okay, the clock is ticking here, it's not really, we're kind of moving along the way we should be. The reality is, though, is we're going to need some answers here in the next couple weeks, if not week.
Mitch, yes, Barry Trotz is pulling a LeBron. I will be taking my talents too. We could have a decision. The ratings would be high in Winnipeg, I'll tell you that much. don't really think that's Barry Trotz's style, though, to go that way.
Yeah, with the press conferences at Portage and Maine, that would be a special one.
Yeah, no doubt. That would be, well, I mean, listen, LeBron literally did do the decision in Akron, Ohio, where he's from, just down the road from Cleveland, where he was leaving, to announce he was taking his talents to Miami. So
right,
wouldn't be the first.
Good point.
Wouldn't be the
Good
first
point,
time that the decision has ripped the hearts out of the fans closest to where it was.
A Dolphin news breaking about going to Vegas. Wouldn't that be an
Exactly.
all-timer? Yeah, wouldn't that be an all-timer?
Hey, I want to hit you with something that Remo and I were talking about earlier, and I just brought up with Mike. We've talked a lot about the leadership situation for the Winnipeg Jets, and many people have different opinions on how they should go forward. And I think the status of Blake Wheeler right now is really interesting. I mean, first of all, what happens to Mark Scheifele? And does it make sense to continue on? If Scheifele's not here, just adding another guy taking its spot in that 3-person quote unquote leadership group with the letters, or maybe going a different route. And I hadn't really thought a lot about this until last night. Paying attention to the Rangers and sort of looking back at their season and seeing the performances they've had from so many players that have had a piece of what they've done this year, and realized that Gerard Gallant did not. The easiest thing would have been is to slap the C on Chris Kreider, an extended, veteran guy that's had, great years in New York, that just signed an 8-year deal. And okay, you're the veteran guy. Here's the captaincy. They didn't do that. And, you've got A's on the likes of Trouba and Fox and Panarin and Kreider. And it really does seem from the outside like that situation for Gallant in his first year was able to, A, evaluate the guys that maybe are best fit for that position, but also to make a number of very important key players on that team feel like they have a piece of the captaincy, if you will. And man, it got me thinking about the Winnipeg Jets situation going into next year. Now, this is going to have a lot to depend on who's the head coach, what their philosophy is on that sort of thing. But I got to tell you, Jeff, and I'm interested in your perspective on it. I mean, does the thought of not necessarily having Blake Wheeler, like you're not removing the captaincy to take it from Blake and give it to Adam Lowry or give it to Josh Morrissey, but essentially clean slate, expand that group, and some of the young guys like a Dubois or an Ehlers or a Connor that I think showed that they were, certainly publicly becoming more leader type players, getting a little bit more of a piece of it and expanding that group without a captain for next season. What do you think about that for Winnipeg?
Oh boy. I think that's a loaded question. And there's a lot of different things I think that need to be figured out before
get the gunpowder out then.
Establishing that could even exist. Well, first off, I think it could be something that teams do moving forward. I think it's something that maybe as new coaches come into teams that you don't just kind of hand the keys to a certain guy. I mean, obviously teams will have established leaders that you don't want to touch at all. They don't have issues with leadership or, with players needing to feel a piece of it or whatever that. But if you're starting here in Winnipeg, let's start with, first of all, stripping the C from Blake Wheeler. I just can't imagine that is something that 26 is going to be cool with. I can't imagine that after all the years, he's put into this organization, feeling like the guy who's, kind of driven the bus here to be demoted. Would he get an A in this situation? I mean, could you, I honestly cannot picture Blake Wheeler being cool with it. Now, I will say this, that Blake Wheeler has said in the past that he'll do whatever is best for the team. This would be a massive test on that statement. So for him to do that, I mean, he'd have to take a lesser role leadership-wise. Now, Blake Wheeler isn't the guy in the dressing room, going to each player and, hitting them on the shoulder pads and getting them to wake up or doing these, crazy speeches at intermission. In fact, he's not like that at all. So I wonder what stripping the C would actually do. First of all, I think it would do wonders for this organization. I think it would do wonders for Blake Wheeler. I've been saying this for years. I've wanted to ask this question to Paul Maurice and just either never really had the right time or whatever. I felt like, because it's kind of insulting, right? It's like asking a player if they feel like they're, soft or weak or something like that. It's like, I felt that the C on Blake Wheeler's chest has been a burden for years. It's been a burden in.
Sometimes he's worn that thing like an anvil. I mean, I know he's very proud.
Absolutely. Exactly. That's my exact point, is that at one point, does it become too much of a burden for him? Not just maybe the team here, but for him personally. So again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I imagine it would take some very, very interesting, heart-to-heart conversations within the organization with him to come to this reality that he's willing to do it. And then how do you sell it? How do you sell it to the organization? How do you sell it to the team? And then on top of that, so moving on from Blake Wheeler, what about Mark Scheifele? He currently wears an A. Should he keep one? I mean, we saw this guy give up on his team down the stretch.
I say all of this in the thing. I assume that he's gone. I mean,
here's the other thing. I wouldn't be assuming Mark Scheifele's gone anymore. I don't think that's as slam dunk as a Darren Dreger tweet was 3 weeks ago. I think that has changed.
Really? Fact, expand on that.
I think Mark Scheifele is not necessarily going to be shipped out of here. I think the Jets need to take a long, hard look at where Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be in 2 years and figure out if he's going to be signed, because it might be a 180 here. There might be a 180 of going back to Mark Scheifele and trying to fix things and establish him here if Pierre-Luc Dubois doesn't want to be here for 2 more years. Because guess what? If Pierre-Luc Dubois doesn't want to be here in 2 years, he won't be here in 2 years. And I mean, there's chatter about offer sheets. I don't want to get too crazy.
Well, that's the
here.
same with Scheifele. I mean, that's no different from Mark Scheifele. He's an unrestricted free agent in 2 years.
Right. But what I'm talking about is we're talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois being a restricted free agent now. So, are we going to see what we saw with Jacob Trouba? Are we going to see what we saw, with other guys that, eventually just move on, get through their deals and move on? I'm just saying that I'm not saying that Mark Scheifele is going to be on this team next season, that, he couldn't very well be traded if the right offer comes. But if you're the Winnipeg Jets, I don't think this long-term, this belief that Pierre-Luc Dubois was going to sign long-term is now as slam dunk as you thought it was at one point. I don't think that's the case right now. And so I think you need to be exercising your options. And your options include keeping Mark Scheifele, who's currently under contract for 2 more seasons and can't move if he wanted to. So if the truth is he hasn't asked for a trade, if the truth is, he doesn't want to move, then maybe there is something that can be said that can reconcile that. Because I think they're in a situation right now where they have a lot less certainty at center than they would have felt a year ago from now. And so, again, I'm not pushing one way and to suggest that, Mark Scheifele is, on the chopping block, not on the chopping block, is being told that he's the future. But if you're getting back to a leadership group, if you are convincing Mark Scheifele to come back, at what role does he need to play? Is he going to be taking a less role in leadership? If he's buying into it now, does he remain a leader? Does that work for other players in the locker room? There's so many questions that I think need answers to before you can establish whether, stripping a C or having a group of A's. Heck, why don't we go down to junior hockey where, some guys wear A's for home games and some guy wears A's for away games.
I literally just suggested that. I'm not even joking. I mean, right. I think that if you had a core group, let's say Wheeler, let's say Wheeler says, okay, you know what? I see where your guys are going. I still want to be, a part of the group. Absolutely, you will be. So you've got Wheeler and Lowry, and maybe one's at home and one's on the road. You've got Josh Morrissey and Pierre-Luc Dubois, and then say you're going to pop in whoever, Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers. And you have 3 on the road, 3 on the group, and you have that group that, kind of empowers some of these younger players that I think from what we've heard have wanted to be part of the solution, wanted to be culture carriers of the team, and that wasn't really there. And I think that fundamental change with the structure and the organization of the team, I think would be very positive for the atmosphere around the team. I think it would be big for those younger players that, I think feel ready to be a bigger part of this team and probably deserve to be as well. And the other thing is, and this gets back to Blake, a lot of the burden of the things that I think were a real drag on him that I think affected him sometimes, both publicly in front of the media and potentially behind the scenes, are removed. And it's not just his burden to carry when things aren't going well. And I don't see how that would be a bad thing for the Winnipeg Jets right now, considering the season that they had. And as far as Mark Scheifele goes, listen, I'm just going to say this. if you want to talk about leadership and leading by example, last season was one of the worst examples you could have possibly had by a guy wearing a letter. And listen, if he was back in the mix, I really do wonder what, how you make that right with the rest of the guys in that team. And that's why I still think that it's most likely that he's not here right now. But listen, the Dubois thing, here, I'll hit you with this. Mm-hmm. If Scheifele sticks around or if Scheifele's traded, do you think that has any bearing on Dubois' situation? Is he more likely to sign a long-term deal in Winnipeg if he knows that Scheifele's not here and that number one spot is most likely his going forward?
Well, here, I'll say this much. I feel like, Darren Dreger's really good at what he does. He breaks a lot of news, but he breaks a lot of Jets news that comes right from the horse's mouth. So if he's tweeting that he doesn't think Mark Scheifele is on the Winnipeg Jets next season, he's getting that from the Winnipeg Jets. So if he's here next year, something changed. So yes, I would go as far as to say if Mark Scheifele is here next year, I'm not saying it's necessarily drastically altered. I'm not saying it wouldn't drastically alter those, those thoughts and beliefs. But if Mark Scheifele's here next year, then yeah, I think things have changed with, not necessarily change in that, Pierre-Luc Dubois is soured on the Winnipeg Jets or doesn't want to be here or wants to get out of here. I just don't think he's as committed to signing long-term. Now, you talk about the splitting up leadership. Maybe that's what he needs to see. Maybe he needs to see a big change from last season. I mean, this is a guy who came out and faced the music in front of media after all the losses, spoke genuinely about the team's struggles and about his own personal issues and all these things. I mean, he deserves to wear a letter. So if that's not part of the conversation for him, then I don't know why he would want to stick around. I mean, this guy has played a leadership role without a letter. To give him a letter, I think, is the least that the Jets can do for what he's, how he's conducted himself with this team and with this organization. So again, I think I'm not suggesting that Pierre-Luc Dubois isn't going to be a Winnipeg Jet for a long time, but I would say if Mark Scheifele's back in the mix and it's like nothing happened last season, I don't think those conversations went to plan because clearly, or he's back, or there's somehow, maybe it's the best case scenario. Maybe they signed Pierre-Luc Dubois to a long-term deal this summer. And then Mark Scheifele's back and they've just kind of convinced him, we're going to work with you and whatever. And that would be, again, the best case scenario. Would that take an incredible amount of work? My guess would be yes. But I don't think, if I'm the Winnipeg Jets, that might be the work that I need to do. You know what I mean? All off season to ensure that this team's, their shot at being a contender or their shot at pushing for a playoff spot. Because I think contender's out of the vocabulary at this point. Shot to push for a playoff spot is there with both of those guys on this team. I mean, whether you like Mark Scheifele's effort or not, clearly, a lot of people didn't down the stretch. But at the same time, he's a quality hockey player. And so if you can convince him to get on the right page and convince, Pierre-Luc Dubois to commit to this team and whatever, what that would take, I'm not 100% sure. But I imagine it would take a lot. There's just, as I said, Huss, there's a lot of moving pieces, all generated from simply a question based on spreading out the A's. They got to figure out that locker room before they start, smacking letters on guys' jerseys.
Well, no, for sure. And listen, I mean, I'll just say this. I'll disagree with you on one spot. I don't think the best case scenario for the Winnipeg Jets, short and long term, is signing Pierre-Luc Dubois to a long-term contract and having Mark Scheifele come back in that same spot. I mean, I just think there were too many issues. And I think that the value of Scheifele at this point with 2 years left on his deal is too great that if you want to make a core-changing move that probably takes some of the assets you're bringing in for Scheifele more on a timeline of this next sort of push of players to really contend. I mean, to me, an excellent deal by the general manager to get maximum value for that asset while also opening up some more room for leadership and really changing the culture. To me, that's the best scenario for the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, that's just my opinion.
No, and I think that's hard to disagree with. And again, my suggestion is all based on what feels like the impossible at this moment, and that's ironing out all these wrinkles that exist, not just with Mark Scheifele, but with Mark Scheifele's teammates against Mark Scheifele. Clearly, there's a an angst building over 55 and how, and how he conducted himself over last season. So I'm only suggesting it's a best case scenario if you can somehow iron out all those issues. If you can somehow bring everyone together and have Mark Scheifele be happy and wanting to sign with this team and not holding that, resentment he's clearly built up over the years and whatever. And he's done a lot of great things for this organization. I
Absolutely.
mean, it's almost it is an unfortunate situation that, by 10 years after this team's, come to be, return to this city, we're now talking about the guy that has really helped them get to that point. Now, obviously, you can make the argument he's also one of those guys that's helped them kind of fall in their grace here. But again, I'm not suggesting that, Mark Scheifele or dealing Mark Scheifele isn't the best thing for this team. I think it's certainly an option. I think it's certainly something you need to explore for a guy who, maybe the damage is too big. Maybe the damage is too much to repair. But I also know there's a lot of guys in that locker room that are on Mark Scheifele's side that still like Mark Scheifele, guys like Josh Morrissey, guys like, guys who have big voices in that room. It's not like everyone dislikes Mark. It's just, there was a lot of tension in that locker room as the season went on. And here we are trying to figure out the pieces here and who wants to be back and who doesn't. Because I'll tell you what, Elliot Friedman's reported, others are reported. There's other guys in that locker room who have been like, not demanded trades, but said, hey, if you're dumping off, I wouldn't be against it. And so, we don't even know who those guys are, but you can imagine, there's a handful out there that aren't happy with their situation. So again, it goes back to really figuring out, and that's where this time comes into play, right? You look at what the Jets need to do and hire, because, a lot of these, a lot of questions that some players have are who's going to be running this team next year, right? Who's going to be running the bench? What does the future look like? Guys want to know what that is. Guys have a right, as employers to know what their future looks like and who their bosses are going to be and whatever, right? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now that, that just needs to be figured out so that you can start picking away at all these other things. Because I imagine the meetings you'd have with Mark Scheifele at this point are like, okay, I appreciate you, you saying nice things about me or a willingness to and I'm not saying, maybe Mark Scheifele's has reflected on his year and feels like he could have been much better in how he conducted himself. So, but I just don't think those meaningful conversations can exist without having your next head coach in place, because those are just natural questions to be had. And I don't think, if you're looking to get the full picture as a player, as much as you can certainly get that from Mark Chipman as the owner of this team or Kevin Cheveldayoff as the GM, you're going to want to probably get that from the guy who's controlling your ice time, because as we all know, everyone's favorite coach is the one that plays them the most. And so, you kind of want to have as a player, you want to have that kind of situation figured out before you start getting into, meaningful conversations with the higher ups.
Yeah, we'll put it this way. The last thing I want is any player, but particularly a guy that's a so-called leader coming in and, it being conditional on how he's buying in as to how much the new coach says he's going to play him before the season. It's still a team game and it needs to be thought of that way. And it was quite obvious that far too often, not enough guys were thinking that way or pulling on the same rope. And well, it's led to a lot of interesting conversations like this on the program.